Hello, everyone, and welcome to Three People, Three Brain Cells, the only podcast with three people who have a total of three brain cells. So, though we are called Three People, Three Brain Cells, that's going to be a bit of a lie for this episode. So, for our pilot or our first episode, it's only going to be myself, Jonathan Ma, joined by my co-host, Catherine Ma. So, without any further ado, Catherine, would you like to start off the discussion?
Yeah, so the topic for today is going to be COVID-19, which is an incredibly obscure topic. We were actually a little bit hesitant when we chose it because we were like, you know what if no one knows about it, but we felt like it was a good thing to start a discussion on. So obviously everything we say is 100% original, never said before. Anyways, quick explanation on what COVID is if someone here just doesn't know. It's firstly transmitted mostly through droplets. It's mostly, I believe, an airborne virus to some extent. It was really started off in China in 2019, so this is December, but it hadn't really spread as much, or at least it hadn't affected a lot of Western countries like Canada and the US until around March of 2020, which is when conveniently we all went down in lockdown. So at least John and I have been sitting in quarantine ever since. Anything else to add, Jonathan?
So yeah, just one small thing to add. Catherine talked a lot about sort of like how this started and stuff. One thing that I just want to also say is sort of an estimate of how long this is going to last, because obviously it has had like a lot of very big effects on our daily lives, right? So one estimate I found online, which was according to Ezekiel Emmanuel, who is the chair of the Department of Medical Ethics and Health Policy at the University of Pennsylvania, is November 2021. November 2021. So we're still going to be in this situation probably for quite a bit of time. Okay. Moving swiftly on then, I think the first topic on the table here, Catherine, is just going to be how world leaders or how different countries have initially responded to it, and what we think constitutes a good response or a bad response.
Should I be the first to mention Trump right now?
I think Trump is sort of the individual weighing on everyone's minds. So for those of you unaware, Trump had a very sort of dismissive attitude, or he's very much not really in denial, but he thought it was a coronavirus and COVID-19 was a very sort of small issue. So some things he has said was like he literally called it a hoax made by the Democrats and stuff, and he's also kind of perpetuated a bit of racism, which we aren't really big fans of. When he said when he called it the Chinese virus rather than its scientific name, he's also done a lot of not very good things. So you might have heard one big deal a while ago near the start of the pandemic was he had basically told 3M, which is a company that manufactures personal protective equipment, to stop exporting said equipment to Canada and Mexico. A lot of Canadians were kind of outraged at that. And yeah, Trump just overall, he has not been very collaborative on a world stage when it comes to the coronavirus.
So yeah, it's definitely worth talking about Trump. I think he's the main one that we think of. Obviously, other world leaders have not been great as well. I think the two you've written down here, John, are Bolsonaro, which is the Brazilian president, and Boris Johnson, both of whom I believe have actually contracted corona. So,
yeah.
You know.
So a funny anecdote, I guess, about Bolsonaro, or it's not really funny when you actually think about what it entails, is he had used his, so there's a video, and basically he used his wrist to wipe his nose, and then with that same hand or arm, I guess, he shook hands with like an elderly woman. So that's a bit disturbing.
Definitely.
So moving on, Catherine. Is there sort of anyone that you think has had a good response? Or firstly, do you want to sort of talk about what you think characterizes a good response to a pandemic?
I mean, I think there are really two sort of aspects to it that I can think off the top of my head. The first one is obviously containing the pandemic, right? So making sure it doesn't spread, making sure you have adequate healthcare, that sort of stuff. I think the other one I can really think of is economic. So in terms of how do you sort of mitigate the kind of shock this does to the economy? How do you help people who end up becoming unemployed, right? How do you make sure this doesn't spiral from recession to depression? I think we're going to talk more about the economy later, but I'm just going to mention in terms of countries that ended up sort of containing the spread very early on. I know this might be controversial, but I believe a lot of Asian countries actually did quite a good job at it. So, like, even looking at China, while their initial response is definitely a bit lacking, like, the persecution of a lot of doctors in Wuhan, I think it is quite interesting that China at least was able to get a grip on the virus through things like extensive surveillance, which may be a little bit unethical, but they certainly are doing a much better job now than the US, so that's something.
Right, just to add on, I totally agree with that, but I think another really important sort of aspect is the sort of transparency. And by that I mean both sort of being transparent with the nation's citizens, but also on a world stage. So I know when we were talking earlier about this, we were kind of talking about the importance of the exchange of information and other things on a worldwide level, and like the exchange of research and stuff like that. Recognizing that this is a very sort of global or very sort of international issue that we should be presenting a unified front to tackle, right? This might be a bit of a controversial opinion, but I think that Trudeau, at least, has definitely tried to be very transparent. If you guys recall, near the start of the pandemic, he, on a daily basis, he was going out and he was talking with the media. He was basically updating the Canadian population about the sort of situation, the day-to-day situation of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I think that that's something really, really important, and kind of in stark contrast to the sort of denial or dismissive attitudes that we've heard from like some of the people we've talked about before, so like Bolsonaro, Trump, and Johnson. Okay, so let's move on to economy, and I know you already kind of wanted to talk about this. Well, you kind of mentioned the economy earlier, so you just want to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so for a lot of our viewers, at least John and I are relatively insulated from sort of a lot of the shocks that the corona is causing. But for a lot of people, especially those working in jobs or industries that are not doing well because of the pandemic, there's a lot of job loss. And thus there's a lot of stress in terms of how am I going to get money. So a good example is a lot of people who are doing, for example, like, labor jobs, like someone who's doing like who's a janitor or a cashier, right? They might have difficulties. They might lose their jobs. Businesses, especially small businesses, aren't doing very well, especially with the lockdown and the laws against frequenting restaurants and businesses for a while there. There's a lot of difficulty for smaller businesses with less funding and less resources to stay afloat. So part of why this is really bad is because I don't want to get too deep into the economics talk here, but essentially when people end up not having a lot of money, not only there's a lot of stress for them, there's a lot of like issues of how can I pay my rent, how am I going to get food, right? There's also the issues of there's less spending in the economy overall, and that basically means that with less spending, businesses suffer even more because now they're also losing more and more funds. So it's like a self-reinforcing cycle. So it's definitely a very
Right.
important part of the response to corona to make sure
So,
you're
so one question I have for you then is, how have you sort of felt about Canada's response, or like our government's response? So the sort of not really the grant, but like there have been programs to set aside money for these local or small businesses that are being affected by coronavirus, and basically funding them throughout the pandemic or the lockdown. So how exactly do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I will admit I don't know super much about the Canadian response, but generally speaking, I've heard some concerns about like just the whole idea of giving certain like financial aid, how that might be very inaccessible to certain people. I know in the US they were trying to give like financial aid to companies, but what ended up happening was they gave a disproportionate amount of aid to large companies that didn't need money. So that's definitely a problem there. But I do think that a lot of what Canada has like implemented, so generally like protecting people who might default on loans, that sort of stuff, right? Trying to help people who trying to help people who have been unemployed, those are generally good sort of measures to take.
Okay, so one sort of theme I think that's very prevalent in the sort of discussion of when we're talking about any sort of economic policy and economics related to COVID-19 is to what extent do we sort of trade off economics for an increased sort of like lockdown period or more sort of like, social distancing to try to talk about our health? Because I think that there is a very sort of valid discussion about sort of if you're easing up restrictions too much and trying to benefit the economy in that way, then you are obviously putting the health of more people at risk, right?
Absolutely.
And then the converse is, or the inverse is also true. On the other hand, if you do want to care about sort of restrictions, about like lockdown and stuff like that, very, very much, then you are going to be harming the economy, not the environment, more and more. So do you have any thoughts to share about that?
Yeah, like I can definitely think of egregious examples. Like I think Las Vegas a while ago tried to reopen their casinos, which was very, very bad. But I think certainly like government policies like trying to, help people who default on loans, trying to give people
Right.
extra funding, that's probably better than just even
Yeah.
stuff. I don't know. I think that's probably much better than something like
Yeah.
reopening things too early, right? I could also
Yeah, I
imagine
definitely
like
agree.
government PSAs saying buy local, that sort of thing, get takeout. That's generally something that could help
I mean,
a lot of these
I
businesses.
don't know how much that would, help
It
given
depends.
that PSAs, we don't know if they're that most
Okay, that's
effective
fair.
sort of.
That's fair. I do tend to
Right.
like ignore all PSAs and kind of like
Yeah, but no, I definitely agree with the idea of, hey, it's not that black and white, or there's sort of ways to not really benefit the economy, but like at least sort of economically help people,
mm-hmm.
or kind of subsidize people, without having to go full, reopening and stuff like that. Okay, I think we've talked about that topic like fairly extensively now. Well, not fairly extensively, but given the amount of time
Oh
we've
yeah.
allotted for ourselves, yeah. So, let's talk quickly about the idea of surveillance and privacy, because you did kind of talk about this before with China and the COVID-19 tracker or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So, do you want to start this
So,
off?
yeah. So part of how China sort of managed to contain the virus so effectively was because China has one of the most developed surveillance systems in any like country. Uh, so part of I remember reading articles about part of what they did is that they actually were able to track down people who had had contact with COVID positive individuals, and they were able to quarantine them. So they were very good at being able to track like contacts, sort of figure out who might
Right.
have been infected and who hasn't been. Obviously this is all done without a lot of their citizens consent, but so is it worth trading maybe breaching consent rules in order to for the safety of the public?
So while we're on the topic, if those of you who don't know, like China, like my sister, like Catherine kind of alluded to, already has a lot of surveillance in place. Like it's almost, you could argue, kind of like a surveillance state, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of breaches on sort of the citizens' privacy. But at the same time, I think we've also seen sort of similar tracking apps or similar sort of initiatives coming out of much more Western liberal democracies where
Yeah.
privacy is a big value. So in Canada, I know that we've had a few sort of COVID tracker apps, so to speak, where basically, you would go on the app and you'd be able to see if there are people with, who've either contracted symptoms or, have had definite diagnosis around you or near you. So, weighing in on that, what are your thoughts?
So part of my issue with some of the tracker apps is I absolutely understand the point of them, and I do think it's like it's in good faith. But part of me also is very skeptical of the idea of obtaining informed consent from anyone in regards to giving away their privacy. Like
Right.
I know that, let's be honest, most people don't give a damn about their privacy in terms of at least like internets, like with apps and whatever. Like no one reads the terms and conditions. So I'm very skeptical, and even if, say, the government of Canada gives you a text, which I received, saying like, "Hey, download this COVID tracker app," if you do download it, are you really giving consent in a way and how this information could be used?
Right.
Obviously, I trust the government in not doing that, but I can definitely imagine in certain cases, even if China
Yeah.
had said like, hey, we're letting everyone consent to this app, and they distributed it and let people download it themselves, that's probably not actually real consent because
Yeah.
people don't
Yeah.
know what they're trading away.
So, kind of to add on to that, right? it's really scary when you start to sort of talk and look at some of the sort of projects that have occurred before. So, Snowden and leaking
Yeah.
some of the NSA's plans to basically be able to collect and monitor all of the American citizens' data and personal information like at any time, right? And that's America we're talking about, where citizens have on net pretty libertarian, pretty big emphasis on like privacy and personal rights and stuff like that. So not trying to start like a conspiracy theory of how like Canada's intelligence agencies are doing that, but there definitely is like a concern of, hey, can we ever fully give our informed consent? Can we ever truly be informed of the potential consequences that could arise from the government having access to this data? Kind of to talk on the other side of things, I think that at the same time though, like there is sort of a lot of worry, and obviously we've just talked about why it's not really unsubstantiated at all. There are very legitimate concerns and fears, but I think that often if we do sort of peg on this sort of idea of, hey, the government can do really bad things, that can also result in sort of harms where, if we're not trusting the government to sort of perform some of its faculties, then that's also going to directly harm us as citizens. So,
Yeah.
personally, in my opinion, I think that like this COVID tracker app or whatever, or similar initiatives are very important. And while, yes, I agree that, hey, you don't know if the government in the future or even in the present, could be using this information for something really sketchy or something really dodgy, or things like that. I still think that it just given sort of the scale or the importance of this pandemic and sort of the issue that we're living with right now, I think that sort of concession or that sort of trade should be worth it.
Yeah. I think that's a
Okay.
pretty good segue to a quick topic. I think I just want to briefly discuss this. Protests and libertarian groups, especially in the US, lots of, what questioning about why do you have to wear this mask, right? Why are we under quarantine? Any
Right.
opinions,
So
John?
yeah, I think that there have been two main sort of movements, like, well, not really movements, but like two main sort of thoughts almost, in terms of libertarian groups or like protesting, right? So I think firstly there was a lot of protests about the lockdown itself. So protesting like infringements on the people's rights to mobility. I think that was one of the big things. And then the other thing was the mandatory wearing of a mask, which I know a lot of people have had, a lot of grievances about or just have not really liked. So, this, Catherine. I told you about this, but basically on YouTube recently, I've been getting a weird amount of. So in my ads, I've been getting this guy from some sort of organization. I believe it's called Freedom Network. And as you might expect with that name, he's basically talking about why COVID-19 why COVID-19 lockdown and like masks are dumb, and the rhetoric he uses is very odd to me, because what he says is, yeah, and this is like paraphrase, but it's kind of basically the wording that he uses, where he's like, they say all you have to do is wear this mask sometimes. You could save someone's life. But then they say you have to wear it whenever you go to the grocery store or when you go outside at all. And then they say that your kid also has to wear it when they're going to school. And I'm like, but I don't see how any of this outweighs the idea of you can save a life. So really quickly, going back to sort of why masks are important, if you guys aren't aware, like Catherine talked about, sort of the main method of transmission for this virus is from infected droplets that come out of like the mouth and the nose. So like maybe you're sneezing or when you're talking and like there's some spit coming out of your mouth. And the reason why people say like wash your hands and stuff is because when you touch a surface that someone else touched, someone with the virus touched, they could have basically, or like, there could be infected droplets on that surface. And then if you ingest those somehow, maybe you touch your eye, maybe you touch your mouth or your nose or something like that, then that can then contaminate you and get you infected. So the importance of wearing a mask isn't really to protect yourself or to stop things from getting in, but it's to prevent your actual droplets from getting out in case that you yourself are infected. So that's why I think it's sort of really, really important for like the group, you know what I mean? Or if it's like one person doesn't wear a mask, it's a very sort of selfish action, because it's not just them, it's not really them that's being endangered, but it's like everyone around them. So I kind of talked a bit too long about this, but basically, yeah. So again, those two movements, and I think that like there are sort of, very legitimate concerns about, well, firstly, just like precedent, and it's like the going back to the question kind of like small government or big government in terms of how much control and power the government has over the lives of the citizens. So hey, what if they don't want to sort of take like have give back their power, which I know has happened. So a lot of countries worldwide have been declaring states of emergency, which does give them elevated sort of power and elevated sort of ability to do stuff and arguably infringe upon citizens' rights. But at the same time, it's really important to remember when people talk about like rights and stuff, that rights are rights are not concrete at all.
Oh yeah.
So under the Canadian Charter of Rights, we are granted zero unalienable rights, and every conversation about rights is about weighing. So my right to sort of wave my hand and flap it around in the air, so my right to bodily autonomy, that might, violate or contradict my Catherine, if she's, in the room with me, right to not get slapped in the face, right? And there, I think we'd all agree that it's better for me to, even if it violates my right to, like, randomly move my arms, I shouldn't do that to attack, Catherine. So I think that most of the sort of conversations or protests about this just sort of don't take into effect how big of a scale sort of this pandemic is, like where we're talking about a lot of people in a lot of people dead. We're not even people who are dead, people just in critical condition or just like genuinely very physically damaged. So I think that like outweighs most of the arguments that can be given on a sort of libertarian side.
Yeah, definitely.
Any thoughts quickly on your end?
Honestly, I think I just want to add, I think the best analogy is really vaccination. So, we know that you can't go to school if you don't get certain vaccines, and the whole point is you have to protect other people who aren't able to get those vaccines because
of herd immunity.
Yeah,
right?
Herd immunity. So the point is, this is kind of like that. Wear a mask.
Let's move on then. I just really quickly want to discuss some of the conspiracy theories that have formed, because as with like a lot of things that happen, there have been a lot of conspiracy theories. So, excuse me, one of the biggest and sort of most widespread conspiracy theories is that this virus was engineered as a bioweapon by China. And the main reason that this theory exists is that there's like a biosafety lab in Wuhan, and it's the only one in China that studies like infectious viruses that are like pertaining to humans. So, there's a lot of sort of sentiment of that. Interestingly enough, I've also heard that in China, there are quite a few sort of conspiracy theories or rumors, I guess, of the other end, that it was actually manufactured created by or engineered by the Western world. I think most of the theories I've heard of point the blame at the US and has been like dropped on China, right? So we're not really gonna go too in depth into sort of the reasons why these conspiracy theories are wrong. I think that there's so much evidence online and so many people saying like, conspiracy theories are conspiracy theories for a reason, right? They're called that for a reason, right? But one of the ones I've heard, which is just sounds really just crazy to me, is that COVID-19 is not a serious illness, but is being spread to cover the harmful effects associated with exposure to 5G technology. So that's really dumb.
I mean, it seems legit to me, I believe that, absolutely.
Yeah, of course. But I think that the biggest thing, or the most sort of impactful thing that, like, affects, people, well, like, a lot of people on, the common people, is the fact that a lot of sort of supplements, or a lot of sort of, I guess, like, traditional or alternative medicines have been marketed, or either like outright, or it's kind of been implied that they can deal with either like by curing or preventing COVID-19. So, for example, I know that one thing that's been circulating in the Chinese parent community over WeChat is that tea tree oil, which is an essential oil, can protect against coronavirus. Some other things are like just various supplements, and also, Alex Jones sold a toothpaste that he claimed killed the coronavirus.
Oh boy.
So, yeah, Catherine, any thoughts quickly?
Honestly, not much. I think there is a little bit of like how far should we regulate these kinds of products? Because obviously, I think that if you have tea tree oil and you think that kills corona, you're not going to be as careful. You could be more reckless. That could spread the virus, right? But
Right.
just should we regulate those? How far do you want to regulate false claims, or at least claims that are scientifically not backed up?
I think that it's just really important and really dangerous. Firstly, I think it's just fundamentally exploitative to sort of, be making money off of people, often by selling these products that are generally speaking quite expensive. If we think of like essential oils and stuff, but also just like, so profiting from, people in fear, but also just, it can be a really big danger if people are ignoring like the words of doctors and scientists because they're like, oh no, you guys are wrong, like this thing is gonna cure me.
Yeah.
So I think that that's really really dangerous. Okay, I think that one of the last big issues that, and I know Catherine, you have a decent amount to say on this, is just racism. So take it away.
Right. So I'll admit that at least like John and I, at least John, I hope you haven't encountered much racism over this, just because we live in a
Nope.
we live in a very Chinese neighborhood, very East Asian, very South Asian neighborhood. We have a lot, there really aren't. We have a lot of like, I'd say 1/3 of the community is just Chinese, so it's kind of hard to be racist to us when there's like so many of us around. But I definitely have heard stories, and I'm sure that a lot of you guys have as well, of people being beaten up for being East Asian, right? Or being otherwise, not. I think I read a story about someone who like had a medical condition and like no one would help them because they were like East Asian. And I can definitely imagine this being like something super damaging, especially if you are a minority. So if you are, say, like the only Chinese kid in an all-white school, right? It could be something where people, mock you, like, oh, stay away from her, she might have corona. Like, oh, she touches you, you have to go wash your hands, put on sanitizer, right? I definitely can imagine how damaging that could be, with.
Also, just one thing I want to add, kind of not really to play devil's advocate, but I argue that like, trying to protect yourself, if that means like avoiding someone who you think has the virus, is like a good thing, or like, it's good behavior. But the important thing is the sort of ignorance that, people thinking that Asian people have an elevated chance of contracting the virus, which, I don't think is, well,
I mean,
no, it's just not true.
The way I see it is I have no problem with people avoiding me because they think I might have a virus because, I'm another person. But I do have a problem if it's because I'm Asian, because you should avoid everyone equally. Yeah. We're all equally susceptible.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's basically everything for sort of on a broad level, unless there's anything you wanted to add quickly.
No, I think that's about it. So we might as well transition to sort of how are we doing personally?
Yeah. So, I think there are 3 big topics. I think one is just relevant to like Ottawa kids specifically. The other one that we're going to be talking about is about like social lives. I think that's also a really big impact that have affected a lot of people personally. And then finally, we're just going to talk about sort of productivity and stuff and like motivation, because I think that's another really big topic. So, I'll just take it away really quickly talking about school. This pandemic is going to continue for quite a bit of time, and obviously you can't have everyone going to school like everything was normal, because elevated risks of coronavirus. That just would not be a very good idea. So a lot of like school boards have been putting in place plans for hybrid, which is like part of it's in person, part of it's online, or just like full on remote or like online learning. So we live in Ottawa, and so we have the OCDSB as our school board, the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. And I won't talk too much about this. If you follow me on social media personally, you'll know already that I've like ranted a decent amount of this. But basically, the OCDSB has a really bad plan, and I think that it's going to affect a lot of us, like specifically, a lot of us like on a pretty significant level. I think that Catherine and I both are going to be affected by this pretty hard. And so basically, just a quick recap for those of you who are unaware, the OCDSB, for those in the IB program in general, is the International Baccalaureate. It's an advanced academic program. you're basically being forced to do in person, which basically for some people means that they have to make a decision between either their health if they're like immunocompromised or for some other reason at risk, or like the health of their families, so they might live with people who are immunocompromised or like elderly people. So they have to weigh that, or their education, right? Something that they've spent the last a bit under a fifth of their life working towards. So that's just something that we don't, it just feels really unfair, and just feels really crazy that like the OCDSB had 6 months to make a plan, and they've just been so untransparent and everything. So again, I don't really want to talk about this too much. A good video or a good resource that I can recommend you guys watch if you are more interested on the issue. It's a video by a channel called School But Better, which is run by a few of my friends, and I think it deals with a lot of the sort of grievances that some students have with the OCDSB's model. So again, if you want to go check that out, the channel is School But Better. Okay, moving on then, I think that by far the biggest sort of impact of COVID-19, just for people in general, on a personal level, is like how it's affected their social life. So, Catherine, do you want to sort of talk about that quickly, or not quickly, firstly, about how it's affected you?
Yeah, honestly speaking, I think I'm a bit of like sort of a rare egg, in the sense that I actually made a friend during the pandemic. I had like someone in the neighborhood who I like was acquaintances with, that I wasn't really friendly with until she needed like a walking buddy, I guess. So I kind of just like got pulled into the role. So we're friends now, I suppose. But I will say that, honestly speaking, I'm relatively used to like not interacting with my friends that much. Like I'll go out with a friend like maybe twice a year at most. So I will admit I am not very social. I love to hear your opinion, John, because I think that you do actually have more friends than me. So I would love to hear.
Okay, so I think the first thing to say is that for those of us who have a lot of friends who might not live like in the same neighborhood or exactly near them, and I have a lot of friends who are just like really far away, whether that be in like Barhaven and Manotick, or just like far off in the east side of the city. So basically school before provided me a chance to sort of see them, and interact with them and talk with them and hang out and stuff, but now that's kind of missing. And I do think that it's a lot harder to maintain social sort of relations and like conversations and stuff online. Catherine, do you have anything to add on that note specifically?
Yeah, I definitely think for me, at least, texting is pretty exhausting. Like, I find I can talk to someone for hours if I really like them, but texting is a whole other ball game.
Yeah, so I think there are quite a few things that like contribute to that. For one thing, I think it's literally just harder to text than talk. It might be more time consuming. You need to move your fingers and stuff, but also just like level of engagement, right? You can't see their face, you can't see their body language or like expressions and stuff. So I think that's also very sort of relevant. So kind of on a related note, I recently did see some of my friends, like I was talking about like last week, and it was really fun, and it felt really sort of refreshing, I guess, because I hadn't seen anyone in like quite a few months. I think overall it has sort of degraded social relations, but like Catherine said, and I do have I do know also some of my friends who had similar experiences. Maybe you meet someone in your neighborhood, and then maybe you can like form a connection.
What's always kind of cool is that I guess I mean, you don't really think about this with social life, but you are forced to hang out with your family more. Like, I've definitely had to interact with Jonathan a lot more than usual.
I mean, that could be a good thing or a bad thing, right? Because I think that there have been quite a few families or like familial relations, especially between parents, that have become a bit strained because they're spending 24 hours of every single day around each other, and that can be really exhausting. Added on to the fact that they've been with each other for the past, probably at least 10 years or more.
I think there's definitely a concern. I especially remember reading articles about domestic abuse, how that situation gets so much worse when you're stuck in a house with that person all the time.
Yeah, okay. So just on our final topic, we're going to talk quickly about being productive or motivating, motivation and stuff. So this isn't only just like, projects that you're doing over summer, but also remember that like the last month or so of school, at least for us, was done completely online. So you want to start us off there, Catherine?
Okay, I will say that I've actually been relatively like, I think this is just because I am a very like stressed person all the time. So I had like a color coded like agenda on my like in a doc where I just kind of had all the deadlines and I was like deleting things and like adding new things and trying to
Right.
stay on schedule. But virtually every other person I've talked to is kind of like, "Ha, I'm like a week behind on schoolwork, right?"
Yeah.
And
Okay, so oh sorry.
oh, I was also going to say long-term projects like the the extended essay that all the IB kids have to write. I've been very much not productive on that. My multicolored
Yeah.
agenda didn't work out for that one.
So, for me personally, like it has definitely hit my motivation or my productivity really hard, and probably one of the reasons for that is, my like personal motivation to work is basically only in the like few days before something is due or something is happening. So I don't really study until like the night or the 2 nights
Oh
before a
boy.
test. I don't really work on like essays until like there's less than a week until the time, and a lot of that is because of the sort of stress or the actual pressure of, hey, you have to go to school, you need to look at the
Mm-hmm.
teacher, and you're gonna get like whooped, right? If you haven't finished your work, or like if you are heading over to this test and you don't know what you're doing. So I think that like that stress has definitely been a lot lower for me, and I think like because of that directly, it's definitely impacted sort of how much I'm willing to or how much I end up working. Yeah, and also like you were saying, stuff like the EE or other projects that we are supposed to be working on over a long period of time, working online and stuff. It's also just been kind of harder to get
Yeah.
started. Kind of feels harder to like drag myself away from like my computer screen and stop watching like anime or playing video games. So now we're gonna move into our final section of the episode. So if you saw our post on Instagram about episode structure, if you haven't followed us yet, by the way, please do so at 3p3bc.podcast. You'll know that we are supposed to have both a listener Q&A, which we didn't collect any questions for this time, so we're not going to be doing, but also a media rec section. So just to kind of clarify what that is, basically we'll just be recommending a show, a book, or other pieces of media that we have been enjoying. So just a sort of a quick kind of a break. So Catherine, do you want to start
Yeah,
us off?
so I'm going to recommend a podcast for the first episode of this podcast, getting a bit meta. But there's a podcast called Revisionist History by Malcolm Gladwell, which is an excellent listen. I'm still in the first season, so I can't tell you if it holds up, but it's quite interesting. Essentially, the premise is Malcolm Gladwell is the host, and he's like this Canadian psychologist slash author. What's kind of cool is he wrote a lot of best-selling books like David and Goliath, The Tipping Point, Blank, Talking to Strangers, all those books, which I think I've started all of those, but I've never finished a single one of his books because I kind of have difficulty with, I guess, his style. I lose interest very fast. But I think that the podcast is fantastic. The production quality is super high, and I think probably because he's more famous, he has access to a lot of different experts and a lot of different people. Sort of, he just looks at case examples in history, stuff like, oh, the first woman who was, had her, I think she had her painting showed in this like famous art show in France, or the first, what else? I think there was the most recent episode I watched. He looked at a case study of Toyota and the way that Toyota ended up losing a lot of money over complaints of like mysteriously accelerating cars. It makes it very engaging by sort of analyzing, sort of taking another look at these topics. Sort of what is the greater implication? Why did we interpret it the way we did? That sort of stuff. It's always fascinating.
Yeah, it's really cool. So for me, I'm going to recommend a game that I haven't played too much of, but I have been playing quite a bit recently. So if you guys play games like at all, you've probably heard of this game. It's been really, really popular and kind of like blowing up the world, or taking up. That's not the phrase, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean. So it's called Among Us, and it's this sort of online game where it's kind of like Mafia, where you guys are on a ship or some other sort of location, and you're playing with a group of like, well, technically it says 4 to 10, but like if you want to have a good time, it's like 8 to 10 people, and 2 of the people aren't actually like crew members. They're imposters, they're like the mafia, and their goal is to basically kill everyone on the ship, without getting found out that they're not the mafia, but the imposters, and then everyone else has to try to work together to either finish their tasks. So there are 2 win conditions. Either they can finish their tasks, which are like small objective things that they can do gameplay wise, or secondly, vote out all the mafia. Or not the mafia, I keep saying that, but the imposters. So it's really, really, it's a really, really enjoyable game, and it's been really fun playing with some of my friends online. So yeah. So guys, that's going to be it from us for this episode.
We'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, your unintelligible strings of emojis. If you guys are interested in becoming a guest on this podcast, please DM us at 3p3bc.podcast, possibly.
Or again, if you have any feedback or anything,
absolutely.
Just again, feel free to DM us at that account.
We'd also love to hear your questions that we're going to answer next episode. So it can be related to the next release topic, or it can just be random questions about this episode, about anything really.
Yeah, so again, thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.